What up? What up? Too bad you can't hear in the background. I couldn't believe it. I come home, got a million things I got to do tonight. Sit down to do a screencast, and I turn on CNN, and Melania Trump is on here doing an interview. Quote, nobody can buy him. Earlier in the interview, I only listened to 5 minutes because I got to get this done. It's 7:45. Um, Earlier in the video, she was criticizing Cruz and Rubio for taking low shots at her husband. I'm thinking, what is going on? Have you watched your husband and what he said? Unbelievable. I should turn the channel off because she's still talking, but now I got the sound muted. But anyways, interest groups, the reason that they evolved historically and the different types. This is just a general set of notes. So I'll try to breeze through this relatively quickly. Hopefully we can get another 10-minute screencast without making it 16 to 20 minutes. Again, an interest group is a group of people that come together with a common interest. Some have a variety of interests, like a conservative interest group might have a variety of issues that they're concerned about. And others may be a little more narrowly tailored towards one particular issue. This harkens to Madison and his idea of factions. An interest group is a faction. It is a group of people in the country that come together to try to influence public policy. And again, that's the key. Interest groups try to influence public policy. The screencast you already watched talks about their different tactics. And again, it's kind of inevitable that people will come together with a common cause. In this particular case, again, trying to influence laws, what the government does, etc. So why did interest groups kind of evolve? Well, the first interest groups tend to be economic in nature. In the early 20th century, you start to have the government providing money to states for various public policy programs and initiatives. And so you have groups of people with similar interests come together and try to get a piece of the pie, as I've said. Many were agrarian or agricultural in nature. The Grange and the Farm Bureau, for example. Also, they wanted to influence public policy. The central government's playing a much bigger role, so they want to try to influence what the government decides that they're going to do from a public policy standpoint. Lately, I would say late 20th century development is a decrease in alliance to political parties. We've talked about a de-alignment from political parties, and we'll continue to talk about that as we progress through this week and start talking about parties specifically. We'll talk about PACs later. Interest groups tend to have, I'm saying too much. Interest groups tend to be on both sides of an issue. So, for example, you have environmental groups on one side, and then you have interest groups that are representing business on another side if you're talking about pollution, et cetera, by businesses. You can talk about pro-choice, pro-life groups, anti-abortion, I wouldn't say pro-abortion, you'd never say that, but pro-women's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion. And again, now that we have the internet and social media, a lot of new interest groups are kind of beginning to evolve, and you don't need as much brick and mortar locations for an interest group to be effective. And we'll certainly talk about the tactics that they use via technology. Again, the initial types tended to be economic in nature. Their goal to meet the economic interests or needs of the people that they represent. And so you have some different types here. Agricultural groups are trying to advocate for farmers. Labor groups tend to focus on the worker. AFL-CIO, American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, UAW, United Auto Workers, the Teamsters. So you have issues with the workplace in the early 20th century, and you start to see all of these workers start to unionize to try to get reforms changed. And you'll certainly talk about that more when you get into U.S. history. Question I always get asked is, do you need to know specific interest groups? I wouldn't say that you're going to see a multiple choice question where it's going to list a whole bunch of them and you're going to have to tell me what they are. However, on a free response question, if you're given an example, you would probably want to be able to cite a real interest group. And if for some reason you can't, make up a hypothetical interest group. All of you love the NRA. That's one that's always remembered, AARP, etc. On the opposite side of the worker or the labor are businesses. And businesses have interest groups as well. Chamber of Commerce is going to promote at a local level businesses. National Association of Manufacturers are going to represent big businesses, big corporations, and try to stop the government from, how do I say this diplomatically? Stop the government from all of these regulations on them when they're producing goods. And we looked at the Meat Institute. They are representing individuals who are producing meat, and they don't want the government to have all these heavy-handed regulations that makes it not more difficult, but more expensive to produce their goods. There are professional interest groups. Some of your parents may be a member of them. AMA is American Medical Association. ABA is the American Bar Association, which represents lawyers. AFT is American Federation of Teachers, and we could list a whole bunch more. So when Obamacare was a piece of legislation that was being introduced, you'd have an interest group like the Red Cross that may want Obamacare for the workers. You may have unions saying, you may have unions that want to expand the availability of their workers to get health care. On the other side, you may have the American Medical Association. Some doctors were not a big proponent of this piece of legislation. In the late 20th centuries, you start to have what are called non-traditional protest groups, representing a group of people that feel like they're being discriminated against. I should add one to it because we talked about it in class, Human Rights Campaign, which is a relatively recent one. NAACP represents African Americans, and certainly used a big push in the Civil Rights Movement started, I guess, early 20th century and kind of gained some steam in the middle of the 20th century. So advocating for discrimination to be stopped many times in the South against African Americans. Now the National Organization of Women, certainly in the early 20th century, you had women's rights groups that were advocating to get the right for women to vote. MALDEF you will certainly see a lot in the late 20th century, which is a Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. They certainly care a lot about this issue of immigration, and I can assure you they will lobby heavily against strict immigration laws if they are passed at the state or the national level. And of course, Human Rights Campaign represents gay and lesbian rights, and certainly really, really advocated for extending the right of women and men to marry someone of the same gender. They certainly advocated for allowing gay and lesbians to serve openly in the military. So that's a good example of not necessarily influencing a law that Congress passed, but influencing the executive branch in whether or not the Department of Defense allows gay and lesbians to serve. Single issue interest groups focus on usually a very, again, narrow set of policy stances. Right to life, anti-abortion. NRA, pro-gun. MAD, Mothers Against, it used to be drunk driving. I think it's destructive decisions. Drunk driving. Drug Policy Institute, legalization of marijuana. So these groups focus on usually a very narrow policy area. And more often than not, they're polarizing in nature, meaning you're either on one side or the other. There's not a lot of people in the middle. So polar opposites in regards to individuals' views on that particular issue. Some of those issues that I mentioned, some people in the country don't care a bit about. Public interest groups tend to not be partisan, meaning they're not Republican or Democrat. They're out there for the public good. Some of these common cause campaign finance, they would say super PAC should end, etc. League of Women's Voters. Some of your parents, I think men can be a member. I don't know why they wouldn't be able to be a member of the League of Women's Voters, but they tend to be women who are trying to educate the public about elections, not take a side in theory, get kids registered to vote, get people registered to vote, get people to go out to vote, informing the public about the candidates in a non-partisan way. And then you have various environmental groups, Sierra Club, Wilderness Society, great groups. Most people are probably not going to say we're pro pollution, but these groups tend to be, again, I hope we could argue that most of us believe that the environment should be protected. Now, what degree of protection is going to vary person to person. But generally speaking, if you went to the Sierra Club's website, oh, I think I'm on tab, so you can't see, I can't go to their website. But generally speaking, I mean, you go to their website, you can buy a stupid stuffed animal whale for a $25 donation. I mean, I think we're all pro whale. I mean, is anyone anti whale? I mean, they're kind of boring animals. I guess they're not an animal. I don't know what the heck they are. Got to take science class again. But if you go there, they want you to donate money. And, you know, a lot of these interest groups are relatively reasonable in price. Usually it's about, you know, 25, 35, 45, $50 a year. Most of them are relatively reasonable. And again, the importance for interest groups to be able to be effective is the scope of how many individuals they have in their group, because each of those individuals equates into voters potentially. And usually, if you're going to be very active in an interest group, you're probably going to be someone who goes out and votes. You're going to have a high level of political efficacy. There are ideological interest groups, and I think I talked about the AFA, American Families Association, I believe, and they tend to be focused on very conservative issues, and it runs the gamut, meaning it covers a lot of issues. These ideological groups tend to be not focused on one single issue, but many, many issues. You have some conservatives. Christian Coalition is another conservative. Liberal People for the American Way. You wouldn't even be able to tell that it was a liberal interest group. There's a libertarian group, which is a Cato Institute, which gets a lot of press. They want less government. ACLU, remind me, the ACLU, or the past director of the ACLU, is going to be at Elmhurst College in a few weeks for a talk at night. I may have to offer you an opportunity for that, maybe for a quiz drop pass. It will be a fascinating discussion. I may be hopefully able to attend. Just writing it down on my notes for the slides that I'll do later. Okay. And then you have some governmental interest groups, and it's really, really interesting. I forgot this was on the set of notes, but when I got home, I was looking on Politico real quickly, and the National Association of Governors actually had a conference call today, and their number one issue was, how are we going to address the Donald Trump phenomenon? And Chris Christie, as a governor, participated in this conference call. And really interesting stuff. Obviously they did not, tell the media what was said in that conference call, but some sources said that Chris Christie gave a very impassioned speech to the governors in regards to why he's supporting Donald Trump and why Donald Trump is qualified to be president of the United States. I wish I could be in on that call, because I would imagine you would have some interesting conversation about the Trump phenomenon. Political action committees are usually connected to an interest group. They give money to candidates. Interest groups try to influence public policy. PACs just give money to candidates. We'll discuss that in more detail later, along with super PACs. Peace.